are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Joined with me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
Alright, man, so now we're finally at the All-Star break, and, man, now it's time to kind of look at, where some of these teams are, but also look at, what's to come in the second half of the season. The second half of the season is usually where things start to ramp up. We're getting closer to playoff time, although technically it's called the midway point of the season, but technically, mathematically, it's really not.
Yeah, it's like 3/4 through the season, basically.
Yeah, but nevertheless, after the All-Star break is when stuff starts to get real. It's where every game starts to matter. The standings get a lot tighter. But there are definitely things, that we look forward to as basketball fans. There are some, great things about the second half of the season. It's kind of the reason why everyone keeps saying that the 82-game schedule is very long, because the real season kind of starts right now, where, teams are starting to get their playoff rosters, their playoff rotations together, and different storylines are starting to pan out throughout the league. Especially this season, after the trade deadline, after, an eventful few months, this upcoming second half of the season is definitely going to be interesting. Which is why in this episode, we're going to be breaking down 5 things we're looking forward to for the second half of the season.
Yeah, exactly. And the second half of the season, it should be a good one. We've seen, I think, the most parity we've had in a while. Last season was pretty good as well, but, injuries just completely ruined everything. Hopefully, that won't be the case this season because it's shaping up to be a very good postseason, which we'll talk about later on in the episode. But yeah, this second half of the season should be very good.
Yeah, and before we even get started, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course YouTube. So definitely subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you haven't checked out our last episode, we did break down the entire NBA trade deadline. We kind of broke down all the major trades, kind of each team scenarios and where they're gonna go from here. So definitely check that out and subscribe if you haven't already done so.
And speaking of the trade deadline, I think the first thing we have to look forward to, and this is probably the biggest question that arose from the trade deadline, is how James Harden and Ben Simmons will work out on their new respective teams.
Yeah, I mean, again, this was probably the blockbuster trade of the trade deadline. Ben Simmons being traded for James Harden. Both are now in new situations,
Yeah, and so for the 76ers, we talked about this a lot in the trade deadline episode, last episode. So we're not going to reiterate a lot of stuff, but pretty simply, the 76ers, they got their guy. They had to give up some depth in Seth Curry and Andre Drummond, plus some picks as well. But James Harden with Joel Embiid ideally should be the next, Shaq and Kobe of this era.
Well, you hope.
Ideally. Right, so it'll be interesting to see how they mesh together, particularly with Doc Rivers as their head coach, and how he's going to utilize them. Because again, like I said, ideally the pick and roll should be unstoppable, right? The the low post action, kicking it back out to James Harden, that should be unstoppable. However, we know James Harden is not the easiest guy to play with, and then when you pair that into a big man like Joel Embiid who will demand his post touches.
Who just dropped 45, by the way.
And yeah, so it'll be very interesting to see how it works out. Right now, they're 15th in offensive rating and 11th in defensive rating. So the question for the Sixers, and they made this move specifically for this, is will the offense improve while, however, still remaining at the same level defensively? Because we know with James Harden comes the defensive lapses. Now, we've seen him play better defensively when he actually wants to, but he's never been the greatest defender. So the question is, will James Harden be able to keep them afloat defensively while simultaneously improving his offense, improving the team's offense? And that should be a good question because we know Joel Embiid's obviously a defensive player of the year candidate. Will he be able to make up for James Harden's lack of defense?
Well, I think that's the main part of what the Sixers did in that trade. They didn't trade away their defensive guys in that move. They really traded away Seth Curry, not a defensive guy. Andre Drummond, not a defensive guy. Ben Simmons wasn't even playing, so he doesn't factor in. So adding in a guy like James Harden theoretically should be a positive on the offensive end. But you're right. How will he impact the defensive end? Especially considering he's going to be playing high usage. He's going to be playing a lot of minutes. And, he's going to be expected to play above average to above average defense at the bare minimum.
And how will he handle being that second guy? Like, he said he was okay with it in Brooklyn, but in Brooklyn it was a lot of the same type of guys, right? Kyrie, KD, James Harden, they kind of all did the same thing. So you could say, oh, I'm second, third, but like you're all doing the same thing basically. Flipping things over to the Brooklyn Nets side of things, the Nets, like you can't say that they didn't get exponentially better, but they definitely got a more balanced team with the addition of Ben Simmons. He brings that defense, he brings that passing ability to the Nets, two things that they desperately needed and they weren't getting with the trio of James Harden, Kyrie, and KD. They really balanced out their team by acquiring that guy who can, be a all defensive type of player on a nightly basis, who can run your offense, who can get easier shots for KD and Kyrie. And they got back more assets as well, like Seth Curry and Andre Drummond, who have already, impacted their team very quickly. They got assets back for, a guy who didn't really want to be there. So I think either way for the Nets, like this fills up a very key hole for them in their championship, run.
Yeah, I mean, again, like putting Ben Simmons aside, that was the biggest, positive we took away from the Brooklyn Nets side of things, was that the roster construction, the balance of the roster is just a lot better than when they had James Harden. Just because now you get another floor spacer in Seth Curry, you get a big body in Andre Drummond, and then potentially you're gonna get a guy in Ben Simmons who isn't, exactly like you mentioned, is not the same player as Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, but more of a complementary piece to what those guys do. So it's definitely a better move for the Nets, a better long-term outlook for the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, so they're like the 13th right now in offensive rating, 19th in defensive rating. They made this move with the hopes that their defensive rating would be better and their offensive rating would at least stay the same or get better as well, with obviously Ben Simmons passing. So it'll be very interesting to see how Ben Simmons works with this Brooklyn Nets team. They definitely do look like a better team or a more balanced, well-fitting team than they did with James Harden already. And we're seeing that, with guys like Seth Curry and Andre Drummond. Bruce Brown recently talked about how much better the team chemistry was already. I don't know how much I believe that, but it definitely showed with the product on the court. Side note, they also have this team moving into next season, so this doesn't really have to be a one-and-done year for them, especially with, restrictions around COVID easing up across the world. And for New York, if they don't ease up on those restrictions this year, Kyrie might have a chance next year with those restrictions probably being gone. So it'll be very interesting to see how both James Harden and Ben Simmons work on their respective teams. The second thing we're looking forward to the most is the race for the top of the Eastern Conference. Now, we're going to talk about the Eastern Conference playoffs later on in the episode, but the top of the East is absolutely insane right now. It's going to be a bloodbath going down to the wire.
Well, I'd even say that the Eastern Conference in general has been the best it's been, for a long time.
I think they, statistically, for the past 30 years, I think this is the best we've seen.
This is the best Eastern Conference. And again, it's not even just the top of the East. Like, we'll talk about the playoff picture. Even, down to the kind of the middle, to the bottom of the East. There's still some competitiveness and some really good teams that are out there in the Eastern Conference.
Definitely the Eastern Conference has been better than the Western Conference for sure.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. So the Eastern Conference, the 3 to 5 seeds, which are the 76ers, Cavs, and Bucks as of right now, are all 2.5 games behind the 1 and 2 seeds who are tied, which are the Miami Heat and the Chicago Bulls. Basically, the top 5 teams are all in the exact same area, and then you have the teams like the Boston Celtics, Toronto Raptors, and the Brooklyn Nets, who are 6 to 8, but are basically right behind them. And then you have the 9 to 10 seeds, which are again right behind the 6 to 8 seeds.
Pretty much, if you're in between seeds 4 to 12, you're within 2 games of each other.
Even within the first seed.
Yeah.
Again, the Raptors are the 7th seed right now. They're only, I think, 6.5 games. 4.5 games behind. 5.
Yeah,
5 games behind.
it's just super tight. Every win matters in the Eastern Conference these days, and yeah, it's just because there's so much competition right now.
Speaking of the top of the East with the Miami Heat and the Chicago Bulls, they're basically looking to get healthy so that their guys can contribute for the long haul and that their obviously their teams can get even better. With the Miami Heat, it's obviously Victor Oladipo's return. They've already assigned him to the G League, so hopefully he'll start ramping it up soon. And then just overall health improvement with Kyle Lowry and Jimmy Butler. Obviously, Kyle Lowry's missed a bunch of games with health issues. He also missed a couple of games because of personal reasons. But Lowry and Jimmy Butler have missed, a handful of games. It's just about them getting better. And obviously, once it comes to the playoffs and the end of the season, they're not going to be missing games with slight injuries. They're going to play through those injuries.
Yeah, no, I mean, Oladipo definitely being back. A lot of you forgot that Oladipo was on the Miami Heat. And the fact of the matter, they can now add him into what they already got going on, is definitely very exciting. And then again, like the Bulls, Lonzo Ball, Alex Hughes was unfortunately out for the season. But even Patrick Williams, who's pretty close to returning as well, will definitely help Chicago continue to be a dominant team like they've been showing themselves to be this season. So yeah, I mean, if these guys get healthy, I mean, again, it just adds more fuel to the fire in terms of how competitive the East has been this season.
And again, with all due respect to the Cavs, none of us really expect the Cavs to do much in the playoffs. Now again, with how they've been playing, they could definitely surprise everyone and actually make things really interesting. I would not be surprised. Shout out Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, all those guys have been great. Kevin Love, like their whole team as a whole, it's been really good. But respectfully, like none of us really have them as those top guys.
Yeah.
Speaking of the 76ers and Bucks, those teams are almost healthy. They're just basically looking to establish more chemistry in the home stretch of the season. With the 76ers, as we mentioned, it's about them trying to integrate James Harden within the system with Joel Embiid and the rest of the team. And it gives them the potential to have the best duo in the league, basically. They also just need to get James Harden to that 100% mark, which we don't know what his situation is. But hopefully he'll be healthier than he was during his Nets tenure.
Well, that's the hope, at least. Like, he needs to be in better shape. And we got to know what that hamstring injury is looking like. Again, like, the guy was hitting step backs in the gym when he first got to Philly, and he had a hamstring injury. So, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how James Harden... And again, this ties back to what we were talking about earlier, but really, the way James Harden and Joel Embiid are going to play together is really going to dictate how the remainder of the season is going to go for the Eastern Conference. Like, these guys can absolutely tear it up, and Philly can, like, rocket up the standings, or they can kind of, stay the same, or drop lower. It really depends.
Yeah, and with the Bucks, they just need their players to be on the floor constantly. They're going to obviously feel the absence of Brook Lopez. Pat Connaughton's going to be out for a while. They just traded Dante DiVincenzo. So they basically signed DeAndre Bembry for the rest of the season. And they also traded for Serge Ibaka, who's going to give them those center minutes while Brook Lopez is out. And hopefully replace some of that lost production. Though this team is not as good as last year's team because they are missing, obviously, Brook Lopez. And then PJ Tucker was a huge, departure. Yeah. This team still has Giannis, who is arguably the best player in the league at this point. And, they still have guys like Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, who can really get it going in the playoffs. So the Milwaukee Bucks, though, again, they are not as great this season.
Don't count them out.
Don't count them out for sure.
Listen, they're the defending champs. Like, they have every right to have, to have the right to defend their crown. Like, they won the championship, and, you can't really doubt them until they lose. So, and again, they have one of the best, they have arguably the best player in the world right now in Giannis Antetokounmpo. So,
exactly. Yeah. The third thing we're looking forward to for the second half of the season is the play-in tournament for the Western Conference. Now, the play-in tournament as a whole has grown on me. I don't know. It's grown on. I like the fact that the bottom 6 teams are not just not doing anything for the rest of the season. I like the fact that there's actually incentive to play for something, because I don't like the fact when teams. It's just like.
But one game to decide it all, like it's
I
one
get
game.
That, but at the same time, it's like, bro, you gotta win. Like, no matter what, if you say you're that good of a team, if you're a playoff team, you gotta win. So prove it, right? So it's kind of grown on me. Now again, the play-in tournament for the Eastern Conference is cool, but to be honest, I don't think any of us expect the Nets to be the 8th seed going into the play-in tournament.
Well, I mean, it could happen.
It could happen, but realistically, I think we all expect them to jump up a bit. And if the Nets are not there, then I think the play-in tournament the interest level around the play-in tournament for the Eastern Conference definitely dropped significantly without the Nets being there.
The most likely case would be either Boston or Toronto coming out of that. Yeah, just because I don't see Charlotte or I don't know who's behind them. Atlanta, becoming a significant challenge.
Yeah, so basically the play-in tournament for this season, I think, is really geared for the Western Conference, where you have a bunch of great teams, a lot of great storylines, all competing for basically 2 spots in the playoffs. And especially in such a wide open league this season where there's no clear-cut champions or, clear-cut number 1 in the league, this definitely makes things really interesting. So starting off with the 7th-seeded Timberwolves, they're just basically looking to capitalize on the rebuild, to see the fruits of their labor of the rebuild, and make their second playoffs in what seems like forever. I think them making the playoffs this season would be even better than them making the playoffs in the 2018 season.
Yeah.
Just because of the fact that this team was built as a whole more organically than that 2018 team, where you had like Jimmy Butler, you brought in Taj Gibson.
And no Tibbs.
Exactly. And, this team as a whole, I think, was built more organically with Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards leading this team.
And shout out Chris Finch. He's done a great job in terms of coaching up this team. Like now I watched the Timberwolves, the other night, and, they look like a more cohesive team. Like they're playing through Karl Anthony Towns, by the way, is having a fantastic season. He's what a player. But even guys like Anthony Edwards, again, D'Angelo Russell's kind of found a role. One of the McDaniel twins, he's playing well. Like they have some players now, and they're all kind of playing together as a collective. So it's all coming together. So shout out.
And they're
Chris
playing
Finch
on both sides of the floor, right? Chris Finch has them, especially when he inserted guys like Patrick Beverley and Jared Vanderbilt into the lineup. You really saw a complete team. And so the Wolves, I think that would be a very feel-good story for them to make the playoffs. And with the way they've been playing and the record right now, I think they could definitely make it into the playoffs, barring the fact that they don't just collapse at the end of the season. The 8th seed right now is the Los Angeles Clippers, and they're just a very interesting team because of the fact that they're doing all of this without their top 2 players in Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. However, they do have a very good overall team, right? You have a bunch of good players, good role players in Reggie Jackson, who's really revived his career.
Bobby Shmurda's back.
Bobby Shmurda. Luke Kennard. Nicholas Batum basically became an NBA player again after he went to LA. Terrence Mann. They just have a very good collection of role players, and then they added guys like Robert Covington and Norman Powell, who hopefully, if he gets healthy, can contribute to that as well. So the long-term outlook of this team moving forward into next season is very good. But for this season, it could really be interesting for this team because they could definitely make some noise in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I mean, the Clippers, you said it, like no Kawhi Leonard, no Paul George. Everyone just thought that immediately just means that they're going to fall off the face of the earth. But they're actually staying afloat, and they're actually being competitive and staying competitive into some of these games, which is why, like, getting a guy like Norman Powell and Robert Covington made a ton of sense because now, even without Kawhi, you can still remain competitive. Then when you add Kawhi into that, well, now you basically revault yourself back up into championship status. So the Clippers, what they're doing, what they're building, definitely has been better than the last couple of years of the Clippers teams, to be honest with you, because now they have some of that Tobias Harris and era of Clippers where they all kind of play together as one.
I think it's just about like everyone's found the role, right? Mm-hmm. Paul George mainly just kind of struggled with that in his first couple of seasons. He's kind of found his role, even though he isn't playing right now. The rest of the guys have kind of followed suit, right? So I think this is a very interesting team overall. I have to give a shout out to Tyronn Lue because we've gave him a lot of crap over the years, right, for his coaching. So when he's actually doing a good job, I need to do the same, right? I need to give him a shout out for that.
Yeah.
The 9th seed is everyone's favorite team, the most popular team in the league, the most controversial team in the league.
The retirement home.
The Los Angeles Lakers. Now, the play-in tournament is basically going to revolve around the Los Angeles Lakers.
Again.
It's been a rough season with all the injuries, just bad play on both sides of the court, not having good offense, doing nothing on the defensive end. AD, always disabled, is once again out for a month with the ankle injury. So, I mean, hopefully he gets better. No hate there, but, like, bro, this guy's always injured.
Bro, right? It's like, can he stay healthy? Honestly, and I don't even know if we're going to talk about Zion later, but can these guys stay on the court, get on the court, and actually stay on the court? I just want to ask that.
Again, like you said, this is what happens when you have a retirement home. Guys get injured, unfortunately. Will Russell Westbrook play better? He's played better as of late, but it's just not been a good season.
2K dropped his rating to a 79. It's
mean,
not looking good for
it.
Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, so like, I don't even think anybody can say for sure whether or not the Lakers will get into the playoffs because nobody knows at this rate with how they've been playing.
LeBron's been playing at an MVP level, to be honest with you, and the way he's been carrying the team. But again, he can't just keep carrying this team and dragging this retirement home of guys who always gets injured, not consistent. He can't keep doing this. At year 19, like this is not what he's supposed to be doing. So I don't even know how Adam Silver kind of planned this so that LeBron's on back-to-back play-in tournaments. But hey, you go.
He helps the ratings.
He
for
does
sure.
help the ratings.
Listen, if the Lakers make the playoffs, it's going to be because of one LeBron James, basically.
Pretty much. Or Melo hitting a clutch 3.
Yeah, maybe. But again, that's kind of the problem, right? Melo's being good for them offensively, but defensively, like, bro, you could just make a whole montage of, like, just low lights of Melo and Westbrook both. It's been bad. And again, if they miss the playoffs, cue the 5 weeks of memes, of Lakers memes, right? Like, it would be brutal for Lakers players.
Definitely one of the most disappointing teams to ever be assembled.
Again, Carmelo Anthony said it, right? He said it best. If they fail, it's because of them. It's on them because they are a group of veteran players who have stuck in this league for a long time and who have all experienced winning and know how it feels to win, at least, a significant amount of games. So if they fail, this is on them. Like, you can't blame anybody else because, again, this is a group of veterans. Speaking of the Portland Trailblazers, they've also been better as of late, especially, after the trade deadline. And that has to do with one Anthony Simmons. Like, this guy's been on fire. And again, you could see this coming because every time Damian Lillard or CJ McCollum have been out over the years, Anthony Simmons has gone completely crazy. And he's doing it again. I think he already set a 3-point record for, how many 3-pointers he's made in the number of games that he's played. Like, Anthony Simmons is just going crazy. He's vaulted himself into MIP status. And again, if you see Damian Lillard come back, or even without Damian Lillard, with how everything is going on, and like you mentioned, it's a knockout style game, right? The play-in tournament is 1 or 2 games max. And so for the Portland Trailblazers, even though they don't have the best team, give them 1 or 2 games, they could definitely beat somebody.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what the Blazers are. I guess that's the one silver lining of the season, where a young player like Anthony Simmons is kind of being able to break out amongst all the chaos, and they're at least staying afloat relatively because of the play-in situation. Now, is this the long-term look for the Portland Trailblazers? Absolutely not. But if you take some of the good that they're doing this season, and if they potentially make the playoffs, then Damian Lillard has a different conversation in the offseason. It definitely can turn into something interesting.
Yeah, and then finally, we're going to talk about the New Orleans Pelicans and their status in this Western Conference play-in tournament. They traded for CJ McCollum, so they're officially looking to win now, at least a little bit.
Thank God. It's been a while.
They have a legitimate team without Zion Williamson. You're talking about CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Jonas Valanciunas, Herb Jones was being a really good.
He's a good player.
He's good, man.
Who's that guy? Is it, Jose Alvarado.
Jose Alvarado.
This
basically,
guy's sick.
Everyone likes this guy. Like, he's everyone's favorite player at this rate. But again, they have a legitimate team, and give them 1 or 2 games to get into the playoffs. They could definitely make the playoffs. Especially, we know CJ McCollum and his ability to perform in big time games. So Pelicans,
CJ and BI are they look like a good pairing together. They fit really well together. That's what, like, the biggest takeaway I had for the Pelicans is that they finally made a legitimate move to move them forward. They're not just staying still, which again, I'm still questioning whether or not Zion can or will ever be able to play basketball. I'm starting to think this is
apparently he's going to have another surgery.
Yeah, I think this is Greg Oden 2.0, to be honest with you. Like, the guy just cannot get onto the court without getting hurt. Like, how many setbacks are you going to have? Or what is his injury? Like, does anyone know what his injury is? We don't know.
Nope.
So, he's going through another surgery. So, at this point, I would just say the Pelicans just build around CJ and BI at this point.
Well, I mean, CJ's older, so But you can definitely flip them. Like, the Pelicans have options. It's not great right now, but they have options. And the important thing is that they remain competitive. You never want a young team to just be bad straight up, because that doesn't build winning habits. That doesn't build a winning culture, right? And we know teams like Sacramento, Minnesota, until this year, basically, like, these teams have been bad for a long time just because they've been trying to tank straight up. And that doesn't work. You're not going to just randomly become good unless you get a draft pick like LeBron James, right? That's the only time tanking will really work. Otherwise, you have to build a culture, develop winning habits for your team to have any chance of prosperity. So the New Orleans Pelicans, again, they could definitely make some noise in this year's play-in tournament.
Yep.
The next thing we're looking forward to is the Eastern Conference playoffs, and I touched upon this before. The Eastern Conference playoffs will be a bloodbath. Basically, one of either Chicago, Milwaukee, Miami, Brooklyn, or Philly will lose in the first round. Take that in. One of those teams is going home in the first round.
Those are all the championship contenders too. Well, contenders, but again, you're right. Like, one of these teams are bound to lose in the first round, and it could be literally any one of these teams depending on matchup. That you could realistically see a Bucks and Sixers first round matchup. Well, are you going to tell me the defending champions Milwaukee Bucks are going to lose in the first round? It could happen. It could definitely happen. And so, when you're thinking about the Eastern Conference playoffs, those matchups definitely come into play. And we've talked about how the Eastern Conference seemingly is the better conference this season. Like, there's just clearly more competition up and down than the Western Conference. And there's finally good parity. Like, at this point in time, there's no definitive clear-cut team that's better than everybody else. Every team is kind of on the same level at some degree. You can say, so Chicago can probably beat Milwaukee, Miami can beat Chicago, and vice versa. So that aspect of it just creates such an interesting dynamic where you really don't know. Like, if you're trying to do a bracket on this playoffs, it's really tough.
And what I like about this playoffs for the Eastern Conference especially is because they're all different types of teams, right? We know the NBA is very matchup driven, and with all these different types of teams, it makes it very interesting. You have the long team like Milwaukee. You have the team with the dominant big man like Joel Embiid. You have the team with shooters like KD and Kyrie in Brooklyn.
You have the 6'9" team with Toronto.
Yeah, exactly. You have the crazy backcourt in Chicago. Like, these are all very different teams, which it makes it it just makes it very fun as a whole. So I think this Eastern Conference playoffs, barring any injuries, which hopefully we won't have, even though, again, it basically hits every single year. Hopefully we won't have any injuries this year, because these playoffs, look to be very good.
They look to be fun, man. Obviously we have our own biases because we want to see our team win, but at the same time, just in terms of good basketball, we're probably going to see some really good series out of these Eastern Conference teams this season.
Even basically, like, you touched upon it before, like, all 8 teams in the playoffs can basically shake things up. You have, if Toronto or Boston finishes as a 7th or 8th seed, or even a team like Atlanta, who recently went on like a 8 of 10 game winning streak.
I wonder who they lost twice to.
Yeah, exactly. But like, all of these teams can make things very interesting in the playoffs, can even knock out a team. Would you be surprised if, I don't know, like a team like Toronto beat Milwaukee? With how Toronto's had Milwaukee's number over the years, like, would you be surprised if that happened? Now, it shouldn't happen, but it very well might happen, right? So even a team like Atlanta, we never expected them to make the Eastern Conference Finals last season, and they did it. Yeah, well, shout out Ben Simmons.
His lasting legacy.
His lasting legacy in Philly is the freaking dunk that he passed up. But yeah, man, like, this playoff should be very interesting, especially for the Eastern Conference.
Yep.
And finally, the last thing we want to talk about in terms of being exciting for the rest of the season is just the parity of the NBA awards. The NBA awards, I think there's no clear-cut winners right now. There's no clear-cut, this guy's going to be the MVP. Now, we all have rankings right now for MVP, for example. You have guys like Joel Embiid, DeMar DeRozan, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic. But, anyone else can also get on that hot streak. John Morant was right there as well. Steph Curry was there in the beginning. Like, any of these guys could get on a hot streak and become, go into that MVP conversation. So the parity of the NBA awards, I think, this season It's gonna be good because of the fact that like there's no clear-cut winners. Parity overall, not just NBA awards, but I think just the NBA overall this season, I think is gonna be really good.
I think recapping our predictions are gonna suck this season just because
Yo,
there's
Chicago,
bro, we were
oh,
dead
man.
wrong. We can already admit that from right now. We were dead wrong. But you really can't blame us because we didn't know. We didn't think DeMar was gonna be this good. Like we've seen DeMar for how many years? And again, the playoffs is a different animal for DeMar DeRozan. But this season, there's no doubt about it. He's in the MVP conversation. Joel Embiid, MVP conversation. Nikola Jokic, he is the reigning MVP, carrying the Denver Nuggets. He's literally the only reason the Denver Nuggets are the 6th seed in the Western Conference. Like, without him, where would they be? Probably like 13th.
At the bottom of the West.
Maybe. But again, when you're thinking about it, there's no clear-cut winners for any of these awards. Defensive Player of the Year. Draymond's hurt now, so is there really a clear-cut guy? Most improved player. Well, most improved player. I mean, you can say Anthony Simons, Desmond Bain, Miles Bridges, Tyler Hero.
Well, Mikal Bridges as well.
Darius Garland, DeJounte. Like, there's so many names that you can bring up for the most improved player award.
Even like Sixth Man of the Year award, like
Sixth Man. You know, obviously, like there's just so many awards in different races now because I guess now that the talent is really kind of dispersed, and now even because of the COVID situation, some players are getting more opportunities than others, and things are just shaping out in a much more free-flowing way, where there's now so much possibility,
Again, this points to the fact that the NBA has done their job in recruiting more talent. Because this is no doubt the most talent the league has ever seen, for sure.
Rookie of the Year. Who the hell's going to win now?
Exactly.
They're all good.
This has been the most talent the league has ever seen. And this is why parity exists in this year's league, at least. Because everyone just plays at such a high level at this point. Right? Yeah. There's so many good players in the league. And so when you're talking about making NBA awards, all NBA teams, just overall the NBA, it's very hard to predict anything. And it makes it more interesting because you get to see different perspectives on, which people think should win, this MVP or this award, that award.
You also get to see how wrong they are too.
Yeah.
Especially for us. But in terms of something to look forward to for the second half of the season, just seeing how these award races are going to shape out is definitely one of the most exciting things to look forward to. But yeah, those were some of the things that we were looking forward to the second half of the season. Like I said, there's probably others that we missed or didn't have really much time to talk about. But the second half of the season is where everything gets real. This is the most exciting time for basketball fans. And let us know what you guys think. What are you excited for the second half of the season? Let us know either on social media or the comment section on YouTube. Which brings us finally into the Up and Under segment for this week. First and foremost, are you up or under on Jason Tatum apparently wanting the All-NBA voting process to change after he lost $30 million last year, I guess due to contractual bonuses. And that's reportedly due to a media member saying that he did not like his shot selection.
I mean, I'm up on it in the sense that, like, a lot of these things need to be reviewed, like all-star voting, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Just in general, everything needs to be reviewed. But my only issue is, like, what are you going to change about the All-NBA process? Like, I don't know what you can really change. Because players always talk about how the media members, again, like, I agree with them. Like, that's kind of BS to remove his to not vote for an All-NBA selection because you don't like his shot selection.
But there's only a certain number of spots, too.
Exactly. And so, like, you talk about, like, for example, like, the players always talk about the media members screw them over. Yes, but we've also seen players are not really the most objective voters either. They're not the greatest voters, and they don't necessarily really know what's going on in the league a lot of the times. Like, we always hear all these former NBA players talk about today's league, and you're like, bro, what the hell are you talking about, right? So, players are not exactly the most objective voters. Then you get into, like, the coaches and whatnot. Coaches are not the most objective voters. Again, I think you have to have a better mix of everyone involved. I think the All-NBA teams, I think, are just voted by media members straight up. But I agree that there needs to be some changes, but, like, what are you going to actually do?
Should get a vote? Adam Silver.
I don't think he does.
Well, it's good because of the crimes he commits. with All-Star replacement voting. Listen, man. All I'm gonna say right here, Pascal Siakam should have been an All-Star, but he's going on the revenge tour. He's gonna become All-NBA.
Well, probably not. These guys always screw over the Raptors.
Listen, man. If Adam Silver screws us over, bro, we're all gonna head over to New York and go find him. He ain't that hard to find.
Yeah, like it's
Like
it's
cue
always
ball.
the question of like people always want to change everything, but it's the same thing as the All-Star teams every single year. Everyone always complains about how this guy got left off the list and whatnot. But there's only 12 spots, and you can't really say, "Oh, this guy got left off" without taking somebody off the list.
Yeah,
you can't
it's
be
tough.
like, "Yo, this guy got left off the list," and then be like, "Yeah, but I don't know, you can't remove anyone off the
I
list."
mean, we're pretty good at like predicting these things, but they're challenging, man. Like taking, replacing guys on a list and stuff is difficult because there are definitely a lot of deserving guys, but only a certain limited amount of spots.
And again, like the NBA players definitely have, a case to gripe with this because of the fact that, like Jason Tatum said, he lost $30 million, right? That's a decent amount of money.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money, right? So NBA players not only want this just for the respect, but also because, contractually they want to get that money. So, like, I don't blame them in that aspect, but
It's like a
you
performance
can't-
bonus in the job.
yeah,
for
exactly. You
them.
can't. If whoever says like they need to change something, you got to give a plan to back it up. Like,
Yeah.
there's not really much you can do with just saying that you need to change something. Like, you need to actually have a plan to change it, and to implement it. Next up, are you up or under on Knicks president Worldwide West, William Wesley, saying that he believes, reportedly he believes that head coach Tom Thibodeau is partly at fault for the team's struggle. And I left this to you on purpose. How about it?
Partly at fault. Okay.
Well, again, partly because I guess they're also at fault.
Sure. I'm up on it because I literally saw this coming. The New York Knicks absolutely suck. I saw Stephen A. Smith going on a huge rant, and I loved it.
You lost a 28-point lead to Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas is a sick rookie, but, bro, he's a rookie.
You lost multiple, 20-point leads over this last 3-week span. Remember, you were up over 20 points on the Lakers, and you still lost. The retirement home Lakers, you lost to them. So, actually, lost to Malik Monk, which is one of the young guys, apparently. The fact of the matter is the New York Knicks suck. Julius Randle, he had a great season last year. I'm not taking anything away from him. He's not the same guy this year. And again, I really stressed. I'm like, do you really want to put stock into one good year for Julius Randle? I wanted to see consistency. I wanted to see him do this again. Now that teams are aware that, maybe we got to guard up Julius Randle a little bit more. He still can't use his right hand. His shot selection has gotten worse, in my opinion. And I think he's just tired, and that's part of Tom Thibodeau. He's running his guys to the ground again. He's not playing the young guys. Taj Gibson plays 25 minutes a game.
Listen, Knicks fans are complaining basically every single game that Obi Toppin is getting 5 minutes. How are you giving a guy like Obi Toppin 5 minutes a game?
But then Taj Gibson gets 20. So
listen, I love Taj Gibson, but bro, Obi Toppin is the number 4 pick for a reason. This guy showed out in every game that he's played, in all the minutes that he's played. And you're not playing the guy. Why? Because you want to stick to your guy.
And he's not a finished product. By no means, Obi Toppin is not a finished product. But the guy needs to be able to play to make those mistakes so he can learn and grow from them. If Tom Thibodeau isn't going to do that, well, again, this was a Tom Thibodeau issue that he had in Minnesota, in Chicago. He's not willing to adapt to the young guys and being able to embrace building up a team from the ground up. He's not that type of coach to do that. He's never been that guy. And we've called it on this show. We've called it. This is who Tom Thibodeau is. So the reality is the New York Knicks suck. Tom Thibodeau probably and rightfully should be fired. And I'm just going to sit here and be right. Because I was. You ungrateful Knicks fans, thought that, we were the 4th seed. Oh, this, oh, that. You only were the 4th seed because of COVID. Just like LeBron and the Lakers won because of the bubble, y'all became a 4th seed because of COVID.
I mean, the Lakers are a different story because they were actually a good team. The Knicks, if you look at statistically last season, the Knicks literally dodged a bunch of bullets in every single game they played because somehow magically everyone just shot bad against them.
Yeah.
Some of it has to be attributed to the defense, but not on that rate. Like, bro, that was not defensive pressure that made everyone just shoot worse for no reason.
And speaking of the fact that when we talked about in the offseason, they went to get more offense with Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. Well, we were the ones who brought up, well, how good are you going to be defensively now? You're adding 2 negative defenders to a team that was doing decently well on defense for the New York Knicks. You got worse defensively,
Not to mention the fact that Kemba Walker was clearly not a good signing. Evan Fournier, Tom Thibodeau, his offense is just brutal to watch at times. Like, it's bad, right? We talk about Julius Randle. What's he primarily good at that he's shown in when he was on the Lakers and with New Orleans? Get him on his left hand, get him running towards the basket. Nobody's stopping him when he drives to the basket. The problem is, what does Tom Thibodeau get him to do? Spot up at the elbow, do a stupid step back. Again, some of that is to do with Julius Randle's bad shot selection. I'm not going to deny that. But Tom Thibodeau doesn't help in that respect either. Like, his offense is just not great to watch. But again, Tom Thibodeau is basically doing the classic Tom Thibodeau of have a good first season and just fall off after that, right?
Listen, I called it. I was right. There you go, Knicks fans. Enjoy your losing season again. Welcome back to reality. Moving on. Are you up or under? On Commissioner Adam Silver says the idea of a mid-season tournament is drawing some interest.
I mean, I'm up on it. Like, obviously, I like the fact that they're always willing to try something out. My only question is, like, how would that work for the NBA? It works for Europe and, like, soccer, I guess. Like, it works for that because of the fact that, like, their championship is based on regular season games, right? Whoever has the most points at the end of the season wins the cup, right? That's how their system works. And then they have also mid-season tournaments. How would that work in the NBA where your championship is determined off of a playoff tournament, where you already have regular season games on top of that, plus now you want to have a mid-season tournament? Yeah. What would be the incentive for teams to actually care about the mid-season tournament? Because guys like LeBron and stuff have already said, if they have a mid-season tournament, we're not going to really care about it because we're looking towards the NBA Finals. That's our goal. So yeah, I'm interested to see what they would do. Obviously, basically, they haven't really done anything yet. They're just talking about it. It's just basically another revenue stream. Again, COVID financial issues, But again, it's interesting to talk about. I would be interested to see it. I don't really know how it would work, especially in North America.
I don't particularly love it. I think the fact of the matter is, A, you either need to cut down regular season games, which the NBA is not willing to do because that also cuts in revenue. And B, you're cutting down rest period that teams actually value. A lot of these veteran teams, a lot of these teams value the rest period that they get at the All-Star break just to recharge. Like, even us looking at our Raptors, like, they need the rest.
Especially with all the injuries now, because everyone just gets injured at this rate.
Yeah, so I don't love this idea. I just think right now the NBA, they have a formula that works, and tampering with it might just cause more issues down the line.
Well, again, one thing we can agree on is that Adam Silver won't jeopardize the NBA. He's not going to do anything stupid. If anything, he'll
except
make it
not
better.
Vote Pascal for the All-Star game.
Well, Cleveland All-Star game, Jarrett Allen. Listen, Jarrett Allen deserves it. No doubt about that. But yes, Pascal Siakam is playing at All-NBA level.
I would have argued Pascal deserves it over LaMelo. I'm going to be that lone guy to say it, but I think he deserves it over LaMelo.
Again, LaMelo
just the way he's
playing. Because of the, one person from each team kind of thing. Next up, are you up or under on the Spurs head coach Greg Popovich passing Lenny Wilkins for second most wins all time?
I'm up on it. One of the GOAT coaches of all. He's one of the best coaches of all time. There's nothing more to say. Greg Popovich has done it all in the NBA. He probably will surpass, become the winningest head coach in NBA history. I
don't know.
Maybe he could. I think he could do it.
I think he's probably going to retire after the season.
I personally think that too. But ultimately speaking, the guy's won 5 championships, multiple coach of the years. He's just one of the best coaches of all time.
I mean, he established a standard of excellence around the league, right? Like what you want to do. He established a culture, of just bringing in random guys you've never heard of and turning them into crazy great NBA players. So
developing a system is also what Greg Popovich
exactly, like
instilled.
he really just developed. He has a lot to do with where the NBA is today. So shout out Greg Popovich, shout out Lenny Wilkins. Um, yeah, shout out to everyone. Uh, yeah. Next up, are you up or under on the Timberwolves and Patrick Beverley agreeing to a 1 year, $13 million extension?
Um, okay, I'll say I'm up on it. Um, Patrick
My
Beverley.
top 5 favorite player, Patrick Beverley.
I don't love Patrick Beverley like Zeeshan does. I respect what he is and what he does, but 13 million is a bit of a price tag to pay for
It's 1 year, man.
for what he services. But it's 1 year, and he was pretty serviceable for the Minnesota Timberwolves and helping them in what the season they've had so far. So obviously rewarding him for that, and you know, at least bringing some more consistency for this Minnesota team that honestly hasn't had a ton of consistency for God knows how long. It does make a ton of sense for them, especially because things have just been working out for them.
Again, Patrick Beverley's basically the leader of their locker room, right? So, he has a lot to do with where the Minnesota Timberwolves are at this season. And like you mentioned, they haven't had a winning season in forever, minus that one Jimmy Butler season. And so, if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves, just don't tamper with something that's actually working for once.
Yeah, pretty much. And finally, are you up or under on Mavs new player Davis Bertans? Basically said the Wizards fought pretty much every day.
I'm under on him because, again, like, bro, this guy is snitching, man. Like, that doesn't look good for your employment. Players are not going to look at you fondly for that around the league. You don't air out dirty laundry that happens in the locker room. Now, again, the media will gobble it up, fans will gobble it up because it's funny, it's interesting. And it's probably true because, we've seen the Wizards. But also, Davis Bertans has no right to talk because he basically stole money from Washington.
Yep.
So, yeah, like, Davis Bertans, you can't talk. Wizard, bro, don't. Again, players will not look nicely at that.
Yeah, it's not the greatest look if you're a player, but
especially when you've been playing like garbage.
Yeah, it's also not true, not untrue either. Like the Wizards definitely had issues, and that's really why things imploded for them this season. But with that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course YouTube. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss a great episode from us. Also, follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at UpLetterAndUnderPodcast, Facebook.com/UpAndUnderPodcast for all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode or reaction to news as they occur. Definitely check that out if you haven't done so. Also, check out our website, which will be updates will be coming soon too. It's UpAndUnderPodcast.com. It will be our central hub for the show. It's a place where we will be writing blog posts about every single episode. So if you don't have time to listen or watch the full thing, you can read about it on our website. So when that's gonna be ready to go, we'll definitely announce that for you guys. But yeah, man, we're at the All-Star break. Things are starting to get more serious, and we're gonna be now ramping up towards the playoffs. So
it's gonna be fun.
It's definitely gonna be fun. But with that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.